The next speaker is Asaf. He's a product and AI leader with 20 plus years experience building data and ML products at companies like eBay, WeWork, Northwestern Mutual.
Thank you.
You've got the clicker, I hope.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. Let me turn it over to you.
Thank you. Great being here. I'm Asaf from Northwestern Mutual. We're a life insurance and wealth management company. Wanted to share a personal experience with you before I get started. So when I created the presentation for the talk today, I actually used GPT-03 and 05, and it was really helpful kind of walking through that, accelerated my work incredibly. I did the whole thing in about 5 hours, where it could take me maybe 30 or 40 hours to do it without that. And then I did that about a month and a half ago as I was preparing. And then last week I came in and I wanted to do another overview of that. And then what happened last week? GPT-5 came out, right? So I'm a Plus user, so overnight I lost access to 03 and 4.5. And now I had to use GPT-5 to kind of help me review. And it completely messed everything up. And I got to the point where I was like, okay, now I have to do this manually, right? Like go in and read through all the slides and think through how the narrative sounds and how the flow is. And I couldn't imagine doing it without the AI helping me. So I think that was a realization for me about how the technology has become so daily and ingrained with how I do at least some of the things I do on a daily basis. I kind of didn't imagine myself doing it without that. But then you will see me talking kind of almost proudly about using GPT to create a presentation for a conference. And yesterday we talked about people kind of hiding how they're using AI. So I don't know, Fern is not in the room here, but Fern kind of reached out to me initially, giving me the opportunity to speak here. So Fern, I was just talking about it. Do you care if I used AI to build the presentation here? Probably not, right? And do you care if I spend 5 hours or 30 hours doing that? Probably not. I'm gonna try you again at the end and see if you feel the same way, but let's get going. So I'm gonna talk about how we are building, it's still a work in progress, GenBI at Northwestern Mutual. And just to kind of align everyone on the terminology, we kind of hit on that yesterday, but GenBI is basically a fusion between GenAI and BI. The purpose of it is really to automate the mundane type of Q&A between business stakeholders and BI teams or data teams that have access to the data and know how to do that. The purpose of it is really just to accelerate the process in the company. For example, at Northwestern Mutual, at least for one of our BI teams that we've been working with, they spend about 80% of their time answering the same questions over and over again that are slightly different in how they're articulated or the time frame or just the specific view that the stakeholder wants it in. And it results not only in most of their time being kind of boring and just repeating the same answers again and again, but actually, the more interesting and in-depth BI analysis that needs to be done as well sometimes takes weeks just because they're kind of backlogged against these, daily similar questions that come in and out. And eventually, this really is all about data democratization, right? So we want to have a data-driven organization. We want to make data-driven decisions. We want to make sure that everyone that needs data has access to the data, but the right data, the accurate data, and also in a timely manner so that they can actually apply that to the decisions they have to make. So there were at least 4 big barriers that we faced when we started addressing that. The first one, kind of obvious, right? No one has done this before. And even when we went to companies like Amazon and Databricks that are trying this out, they don't really have mature solutions. There's nothing we can really learn from others in this space. At least not others that have done this successfully in the past. So I'm going to leave this to the end of the conversation. We'll go through how we did it technologically, but really we started by trying to understand, number one, how does our data look like? Does it even make sense? Is there any kind of near-term future, we can imagine just dumping data into a machine and having it spit back out to us business answers about it. The next one is trust overall. So it came up a couple of times yesterday, but there were multiple barriers of trust that we had to overcome and get through so that we can even get corporate sponsorship to do that kind of work. And eventually budget and impact. So I don't know about you guys, but last time that I got like a blank check to run a year-round experiment, I woke up from the dream and I realized that this is not how the world works. And even, the stakeholder that is most invested in technology, that has the biggest amount of FOMO, they're not going to put $1 million in budget to a research project they can't control. They don't know what they'll get out of. So those were the 4 main ones, and I'm gonna walk through them. So on the data side, we could have gone with kind of a very clean and pristine data set, but we decided not to. And the reason for that is that we wanted to make sure that we really understand the challenges that we're going to have to overcome before we build anything that kind of seems amazing and perfect and kind of works out of the box, because we had experience with GenBI. We know that it's not as easy as it looks like, and we wanted to tackle the problems as early as we could. We also decided to use real data because we had real, true, and tested examples of what people were asking about, what they care about, what were the answers that they were given, and what were the challenges with the data that had to be overcome by our BI team so that they can give the right business answer to that question. And we also had a very large and fairly invested team of BI experts that could help us figure this out, and were actually partners along the way. And on the organizational level, we had priority because that team was actually being tasked with improving their processes by giving better answers, faster answers, more kind of holistic. And that aligned very well with their business initiatives and priorities so that we can actually kind of get on their timeline so they can help us back. Lastly, obviously, data had to be exported and controlled in a very kind of clean environment so that we can experiment as much as we wanted. That was more of a technical challenge, but again, the BI team was there to help us export the data, mask the data, and figure out what were the right ways and elements that needed to be addressed. Now, the point of trust is really complex because there are a lot of different users or stakeholders that will want to interact with such a tool, and they have very different expectations, they have very different experience in using GenAI or GenBI, they have different experience in using technology in general. But as we were working through this, and also from a lot of experience we had in building previous GenAI products and applications, we were able to identify several biases that people had when they interacted with anyone really, but specifically with technology, that we needed to make sure we are not ignoring, first of all, but that we are targeting and that we're aware of, and that we're building our application and interaction in a way that can help them overcome their own biases. So at least some of these, first of all is confidence and fluency are not accuracy, right? So ChatGPT, Claude, whomever you work with, they are super articulate, right? And they talk in utmost confidence, and even when you tell them something isn't right, they're gonna go, you're right. Let me kind of rephrase my question, rephrase my answer and give you a better solution. But the point is that when we as people communicate with any kind of party that is very confident and fluent about the answer, this gives us the sense that they are accurate, that they know what they're talking about. Similarly, responsiveness does not equate to reasoning, right? So ChatGPT is very good in responding very, very quickly, and also explaining why it did some things in some ways, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it can apply the right reasoning to the process unless it was taught or shown how to do that. And to be honest, right, like how many people here read the reasoning that ChatGPT gives you or any kind of application when you get an answer for it, right? Maybe one person, right, that actually tries to read the reasoning, but I think like me, most of us, we just want to see the bottom line, right? Now, if the bottom line makes sense, somehow, we don't even question it. We don't go back and see if the reasoning is right. Only if the bottom line doesn't make sense, we go back and try to see how did it reach this kind of conclusion. The next one is knowledge does not equate intelligence, right? So a BI system that we will build will have access to all the data, all the knowledge in the company. It does not mean that it understands how to use it. Okay, it does not mean that it makes the right conclusions using that data, but it spits so much information at us that we sometimes tend to believe that it knows what it's talking about. And similarly to verbosity, right? So it's going to give a very, very detailed answer. It's going to provide us with a lot of information about it, and it does not necessarily mean that it truly understands the deep parts of it just by spitting out, more and more information about it. Now, this last one is really the most important one that we had to tackle, and that is position does not mean proficiency. So if I, as a data and AI leader in the company, spin up a GenBI agent, and I start telling everyone in the company, come use our GenBI agent, it's gonna make your life so much easier, they assume that whatever I gave them is right, just because I gave it the role of being that Gen AI bot that everyone accesses and comes to with questions. So a lot of times they may not even question whether the answer was right just because it has that corporate title of being the GenBI agent at Northwestern Mutual. So how did we overcome it? First of all, obviously we put everything in a sandbox, right? Nothing goes on in production, that goes without saying, but it also gave us the ability to experiment with a lot of the newer models that haven't become officially available in production environments in the company. And that proved to be extremely useful because during the month of research, every 6 to 8 weeks, we got a better model, right? And we were able to experiment with that and see how we were doing and just stay on top of what's going on in the industry. And the next one is really a kind of a crawl, walk, run approach. It breaks down in a lot of different dimensions, but the one that I think most interesting is we started with data-savvy individuals that were able to be critical about the answers, and it could tell us if something was wrong and we could improve that. And the execs are going to be the really last people that will be exposed to that. Now, I want to tell a short story about this from my time at eBay. When I was at eBay, we built this completely new experience of how to shop on the website, and we made the mistake of opening this up to everyone, and specifically to the CTO of the company. And that was as we were building and figuring things out. So you can imagine that the CTO of the company started pinging us daily on why is this experience looking like this? Why is the data looking like that? And I was kind of a senior PM at the time, and I said to our CTO, hey Steve, I own this project. If you have any questions, reach out to me. Big mistake. Huge. I got daily phone calls of, hey Asaf, this isn't working, right? And emails. And so execs have very different expectations. Execs not always respect the process of research and discovering and breaking and improving. So that's why, from a rollout perspective, we make sure that we start with the people who truly understand what's going on and can actually give us valuable feedback. His feedback was good, right? It wasn't bad. It was just not what we needed at the time to help us move forward. The next one is promoting certified content first. And that is really important because there are so many ways of how to look at the data. Some of them are right, some of them are just dead wrong. And I'll give you another example. So we work with the Northwestern Mutual servicing team. And when you call into the service center, there's a bunch of KPIs, right? Did you solve the client's problem? How long the conversation was. The third KPI is number of transfers. right? So transfers is like when you call in and you say, hey, can you help me take out a loan against my life insurance policy? And that person tells you, I actually need to transfer you to a colleague. And then you get to that colleague and then you say, well, they actually transferred you to the wrong person, let me transfer you again. Horrible experience. So that's a major KPI for the call center. Now, if you were an executive and you came and asked, show me the transfer trends over the past 3 quarters, and you would expect to see it go down, the underlying data is going to fail you. Why? Because it depends on how you count transfers. So at the end of every such call, I guess that everyone knows this experience, right? What do you get at the end of a service call? Survey, thank you very much. So the survey transfers you to another system that runs the survey. Sometimes that transfer counts, and sometimes it does not count as a overall kind of session transfer. How do you know how to do it? No one knows, right? Only the servicing BI team know how to filter out those transfers that shouldn't be counted towards that KPI. And they created a certified report, right? They created a query that knows when and how to filter those transfers out and give it the right number, so that when I look at it and when someone else looks at it, we both see the same number. So that's a huge part of that, being able to leverage the corporate knowledge of what's right, what are the right ways of using the data. Lastly, expectation alignment. So as I said, we were looking only to tackle the 80% of the really mundane, repetitive tasks that were going on. We were not looking to solve everything and not looking to run an entire BI analysis that could take weeks for a person to do. So that was just making sure that we're all aligned on what the corporate is going to get. Now, this was a very big leap to take. There's huge gaps that we needed to overcome and research that we needed to do. So we decided to break it down to a process that had intermediary deliverables. And I want to kind of quickly take you through the strategy that we had on how to go from 0 to 1,000 by breaking down the problem. So the first thing that we did is kind of a POC, right? So natural language to SQL, response generation, can we even make it work? We saw that it can be done. It's not that difficult, but obviously the devil is in the details. The next step that we took was understanding what kind of metadata and context needs to be in place for an LLM to be able to understand the data, comprehend what it's being asked, find what data is relevant to the question that was asked, and how to put it together to formulate a business answer. This is something that had an immediate impact on the business, because we were able to use these learnings of what good metadata looks like, semantic layer, context engineering, all of that, and immediately apply that to our catalogs. And that was being used not only by the LLMs, but also by people like me, right? Product managers who want to understand what the data is, but don't really understand how the data is being generated, the lineage, or the joins, etc. The next phase was building a multi-context semantic search, right? So this is about taking the question and the metadata and finding what is the data that I need to access to be able to answer the question. This research led to an ability and an application that actually served, I think it was 20 or 30% of the time of the cases where people were just asking, what data exists that I can use to try and answer my question? And who knows this data so I can work with to find the answer, right? Even that finding data problem is a big problem in a large enough organization, and there are so many data owners that you never know who to reach out to. The next phase was about representation and visualization. So given that we have the data and we understand the question, how do we present it back? And from this point, we could actually take an existing report, present it, and start pivoting it, right? So changing the time frames, changing the views, putting in some filters, everything with natural language, right? So if you don't know how to operate a Power BI or a Tableau, or if you just don't have time for that, ask a very specific questions. We'll try to pivot and create the exact view of the data from a certified report. Next one was role-based fine-tuning, which was really about understanding the type of answers and the level of granularity and details that we can give to each one, different stakeholders, so that can finally lead us to kind of the holy grail of a GenBI agent that can answer anyone, any type of question based on the right information and the right knowledge that we have. So some of the value that it gave us, first of all, it gave us incremental value in each step of the way, right? It allowed us to provide a very transparent progress report to our executives so they knew not only what's happening, but also what to expect from the next phase. It allowed us to create that incremental value that doesn't only impact the company, but it actually feeds the next cycle of research by getting feedback, by showing how people may interact with a component that will then go to overall architecture. That enabled adaptive learning so that we could understand what good looks like as we were building that, and we didn't have to wait until we had an entire system built into place. And lastly, it allowed for mitigating of risk on the stakeholder level, right? So they did not have to write $1 million check up front and wait a year to see the ROI. They funded the research project incrementally. They could stop at any point in time. And the reason for that is, first of all, because there was an outcome that had impact. So there was ROI created incrementally, but also there was much less of that sunk cost bias, right? So they realized some business potential. If we wanted to stop at that point in time, it wasn't just sunk cost, there was benefits coming back. Now this is super important because while we were building this, a lot of other players in the industry were building this, right? And some of our vendors were building it. And by us researching that internally, we not only understood what is the right way of interacting with the system, what are our expectations from the system, we also created benchmarks, okay? And when we, for example, went out to Databricks Genie, right, and we talked to them about how are you measuring this, what are the guardrails that you have, what can we expect from your system, they had nothing, basically. They had no benchmarks, they didn't really have a research done around that. So it was kind of a, take it and use it and you tell us, right? But that's not something we can work with in a company like ours. So even if at the end of the line, we will decide to use a vendor to solve this problem, we now have the tools to evaluate and vet them and make sure that we're getting what we need that is also robust and secure. I don't have a lot of time left, but I do kind of want to run quickly through how we actually built that, what it looks like under the hood. So first of all, you know, it begs the question, why don't you just take data and dump it into ChatGPT? Well, it doesn't work. There's too much context. There's too much information. There's not enough semantic context for the LLM to understand. It also doesn't guarantee that understanding from the semantic context. And lastly, governance is non-negotiable. We can't really control what ChatGPT gives us if we just dump all the information in. What we did do is we built this in kind of a stacked architecture. So underlying data and metadata is super important. We had to figure out what it looks like, good metadata for LLMs. We built 4 different agents that I'm going to show you how they work next. A metadata engine that understands the context, SQL agent that can run a data query, a RAG agent that can try to surface existing reports, and then a BI agent that basically brings everything together and gives you an answer. Governance and trust has to be built on top of that. Orchestration engine, I think we talked a bit about this in the past few lectures. And then contextual user interface, which is very important to make sure that people can interact with this in an effective way. So the flow goes like this, right? A business question comes in, there is an orchestrator that activates the entire system. The first step that it does is understand the data. So it uses the metadata engine agent to figure out what we're asking about and go out to the catalog and find the relevant data set that could be used to answer the question. Next, we ask the question of, is there an existing report right? I don't want to run a super complex SQL process. It's very prone to hallucinations. It's also, much longer. And we already talked about why it's better to surface an existing report rather than make up a new one. If we can't find an existing report, then we run an SQL agent, right? Given that we know what the data is and what information we need from the data, we try to articulate an SQL query, we execute it, we bring in the data, and then we pass the data to the BI agent, which tries to formulate a business answer depending on the question that was asked, given the data that it has is available. Now, if we're already in a session, right, where we have repeatable questions coming in, then we have this kind of process that says, I already have the data, I don't need to go through all this process, I'm just going to run a different query, business query against the data that I already have. And as we said, each one of these parts can be productized separately, right? And we can spin up an application that solves an actual business need just by picking these components and wrapping them up and delivering them to the business. And the way we deliver it is by meeting the stakeholders where they are, okay? So it can be a Slack bot, it can be integrated into a CRM, it can be integrated even to your email client, depending on where people are used to accessing this kind of information. And really it's about understanding that most people don't know how to interact with GenAI. They haven't experienced that before, definitely not in a context like this. So it needs to be very direct, very, very specific. I know I'm out of time. I'm just going to run kind of quickly through that. Maybe I'll skip through that, but there is a lot of details that go into building observability internally and externally so that we can guarantee robustness and we can guarantee that the answers that we're getting are inline corporate policies and how we want to operate. There's a bunch of tips and tricks that I wanted to talk about, but the baseline is that there is a lot of technical acumen that needs to be built into, needs to have to be able to build something like this. And as I said, these types of tips and tricks are not only if we build it ourselves, but it's also about how we would use a third-party solution to come in and try to do that for us, and where are the places where it might fail, and how can we train our people to avoid some common mistakes and making sure that they're getting the right value out of the system. I have a bunch of stuff that I could talk about where I see the industry going, but I really don't have time for this. Feel free to come up to me, any of the breaks or kind of later this evening. Happy to talk about this. And yeah, thank you very much.
I think we can squeeze in one question. Anybody have a question? Okay, in the back.
I'm excited to dash, although I don't dash very well. So the architecture that you displayed was, I would say, clean and beautiful. From a sustainability perspective, all of that is built on a particular AI core model. Every time that model updates or changes, it potentially has a negative or positive impact on all those agents and their interactions. What does your process look like, and how do you sustain, how much effort is it going to take to sustain all those data agents and keep them flowing as the base models evolve over time?
Yeah, great question. So again, if you missed the first part, the question was about how do we switch out models, basically, if models improve while maintaining the robustness of the system. So it is difficult. We haven't done that much as of yet, but the overall process is kind of the same as regular software engineering. So you have to have a very robust test battery in place that you can run on an ongoing basis to do to make sure that any change that you have don't imply negative on the outcome. And that type of testing battery is slightly different than software, like traditional software development, because it doesn't only look at inputs and outputs, it also looks at how do you articulate the answer? How well can you respond to variations in how the question is being presented? So it does require an extra level of sophistication on how to test it. But that kind of ability to test and retest the system automatically is critical for us to be able to switch out models. We have used multiple models depending on the context. There's some bigger ones in inference, some smaller ones in executions. And every time you make that change, that's something that you have to kind of retest and rerun.
Terrific. Thanks so much for the time.
Thank you.